Can you carry me for a while? The little girl looked down at her feet, shifting carefully as if even standing still required effort. My foot hurts, she added softly. It's hard to walk. William Carter slowed, though every instinct told him not to. I'm in a hurry, he said, his voice calm. Practiced. You should ask someone else to help you. The girl nodded as if she had expected that answer. I did, she said. But everyone's moving fast today. They didn't stop. Around them, the church pulsed with movement. The Sunday service had ended, and the fellowship hall had turned into a crowded line of people waiting for food and supplies. William glanced toward the exit again, then back at her. What happened to your foot? He asked. It's just a little hurt, she said. People didn't mean to, but when we were in line, they stepped on it by accident. William's expression tightened slightly. That doesn't sound serious, he replied. You can still walk. Instead of arguing, the girl quietly lifted her foot. Like this, she said. She took a step forward. It was uneven. She tried another step slower this time, her hand brushing the edge of the pew to steady herself. William watched before he could respond. A voice from the side cut in. She's not exaggerating. An older woman stepped forward. Concern etched across her face. I saw it happen. The line got tight. Folks didn't mean harm, but she got stepped on more than once. A man holding a grocery bag nodded. She's been limping for a while now. Another woman balancing a toddler on her hip added with a tired sigh. We would help, sir. We really would, but we've got our hands full, and it's a long walk out there. She shifted the child higher against her shoulder, her eyes flicking apologetically toward the girl. If you can, she said gently to William. Maybe you could carry her a bit, just until she's steady again. Another voice chimed in from behind. Yeah, we'd stop, but we're already running late. Kids, work, you know how it is. The small cluster formed briefly, then loosened again. People weren't unkind. They were just stretched thin, busy, moving forward because they had no choice. William felt their words settle around him. He looked back at the girl. She stood quietly, her foot lowered again. Her balance carefully maintained. She didn't look at the others. She looked at him. I can still walk, she said softly. It's just my house is kind of far. There was a pause. Then a little more hesitantly, she added. If you carry me just for a while, I can walk the rest. William's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the exit once more, then back at her. No one else could help you? He asked, though he already knew. She shook her head. They all said they were busy. A beat passed. Then she stepped a tiny bit closer, her voice softer now, almost careful. Please, sir, she said. Just a little while. And then, without warning, memory broke through. A smaller hand tugging at his sleeve, a bright voice, warm, alive, impossible to forget. Daddy, can you carry me just for a little bit? I'm tired. William's breath caught. For a moment, the church disappeared. The voices, the movement, the weight of the present, all of it faded behind something far more dangerous. He saw her, his daughter. His chest tightened. William exhaled slowly. He reached up and removed his gloves, placing them carefully on the pew beside him. Then he stepped forward, not away toward her. All right, he said quietly. He moved closer, closing the small distance that had separated them. Without hesitation, now William bent down in front of her, lowering himself to one knee on the worn wooden floor. Come here, he said. She hesitated for just a moment, only long enough to be sure. Then she stepped forward. He reached gently, guiding her. As he turned, positioning himself so she could climb onto his back. She placed her small hands on his shoulders, careful, respectful, as if she understood this was something being given, not taken. William rose slowly, lifting her with steady strength. She was light as her arms settled around him, as her presence became something real against his back. Something inside him shifted, and as William Carter took his first step forward, carrying her through a space where everyone else had been too busy to stop, he realized something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The little girl adjusted slightly, careful not to press too hard against his shoulders. Am I too heavy? She asked. No, William replied. You're fine. He moved through the church hallway, past the line of people waiting for food. Conversation softened as they passed, eyes following them, not because of who he was, but because of what he was doing. A man stepped aside. A volunteer paused mid-sentence. A mother holding a toddler gave a small, approving nod. The girl noticed. They're looking, she said quietly. They usually do, William answered. She leaned slightly, peeking past him. Because you look important, she added. He didn't respond to that. William stepped outside. His car was parked along the curb. The driver straightened when he saw him, eyes briefly flicking to the child on William's back before returning to neutral. William gave the smallest shake of his head. He turned away from the car. The girl followed the movement. Is that yours? She asked. Yes, it's really nice. Aosa. Then almost thoughtfully, she said. I like walking better. William glanced slightly over his shoulder. Why? You notice things, she said. When you're in a car, everything just goes by too fast. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped onto the sidewalk, moving away from the curb, away from the waiting car, and into the street where life unfolded without schedule or structure. For a few moments, they walked in silence. Then she spoke again. Sir, yes, if it's okay. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Could you carry me all the way home instead? William's steps slowed slightly. All the way, he asked. She nodded against his back. It's not too far, just a few blocks more. A small pause. Then she added, softer this time. I was going to ask you to carry me just a little while, but it still hurts when I try to walk. William said nothing at first. The city stretched ahead of them. Brick buildings, narrow sidewalks, small front yards marked by worn fences. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. Before he could respond, she continued, I can make it worth your time, she said with quiet sincerity. That made him glance back slightly. How so? I can invite you to dinner, she said. There was no hesitation in her voice. No uncertainty. Dinner. William repeated. Yes, sir. My mom's cooking tonight. She always makes enough for one more person. The words landed differently than anything else she had said. Not a transaction. Not a bargain. Just an offer. She'd say thank you, the girl added. She always does when someone helps. William felt something shift again. I don't think your mother is expecting guests. He said she doesn't mind. The girl replied quickly. She says you should always leave room for kindness at the table. William's grip tightened just slightly beneath her knees. They turned a corner at her direction. The street narrowing, the buildings closer together. The rhythm of the neighborhood changed, quieter, more personal. You're sure she wouldn't mind? He asked. I'm sure, she said. She likes meeting good people. William let out a quiet breath. He walked a few more steps, his mind moving through possibilities, through reasons to decline, through the familiar logic that had guided him for years, but none of those reasons felt as solid as they once had. On his back, the girl remained still, trusting him completely to decide. He looked ahead, then quietly he said, all right. She shifted slightly, a small movement that carried unmistakable relief. Thank you, she said. They continued walking. You didn't have to stop, she said after a while. William kept his eyes forward. No, he admitted. I didn't, but you did. He didn't answer that. They walked in silence again, but it wasn't empty. It held something quiet, something steady. After a few more steps, she spoke once more. You carry people carefully, she said. William almost smiled. I suppose that's something you learn, he replied from practice. He thought about that. Then after a moment he said from loss. If this moment touched you in any way, take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you are watching from. And if you believe stories like this still matter, don't forget to subscribe for more. She didn't ask him to explain. She just nodded as if she understood more than most people would. They reached another corner and she gently pointed again this way. William followed. William Carter had long forgotten what it felt like to walk without purpose. Not direction. He always had direction. His life was built on it. Every step calculated, every movement aligned with something larger, something measurable, but purpose. The quiet kind that didn't need validation or outcome had slipped out of reach long ago. Yet here he was walking through a neighborhood he had never truly seen, carrying a child who had entered his life less than 15 minutes ago, heading toward a home he had not planned to visit. And somehow none of it felt misplaced. Almost there, the girl said softly, lifting her hand slightly to point ahead. Just past that corner, William followed her direction without question. The street narrowed as they turned, the sidewalks uneven in places where time and weather had worn them down. A row of small houses lined the block, each one different, each one carrying quiet signs of care. A chair on a porch, a hanging plant half wilted but still alive. Curtains drawn neatly behind windows that reflected the late afternoon light. It was a world far removed from his own. And yet it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt grounded. You walk this way every day? He asked. Most days, she replied. When it's not too cold. And when it is, my mom walks with me, she said. She says, the cold feels smaller when you're not alone. William absorbed that without responding. The words settled somewhere deeper than he expected. They reached a modest house near the end of the block. The paint had faded over time, but the front steps were clean, carefully swept. A small wind chime hung near the door, shifting gently with the breeze. This is it, she said. William stopped. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then carefully, he bent slightly, lowering himself just enough for her to slide down from his back. She landed lightly, testing her foot as she stood. There was still a trace of discomfort in her movement, but it was less now manageable. Thank you, she said again, looking up at him. William straightened, his hands falling naturally to his sides. You're welcome. She hesitated for a moment, then turned toward the door. Without knocking, she pushed it open slightly. Mom, she called gently. I'm home. There was a pause, then the sound of movement inside, quick, alert. A woman appeared in the door. As seconds later, she was in her early 30s, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression shifting instantly from concern to relief as she saw the girl standing there. There you are, she said, stepping forward. I was starting to. Her words stopped when she noticed William. The shift was immediate, not fear, not suspicion, just awareness. Her posture straightened slightly, her eyes moving from William to her daughter, then back again. Mom, the girl said, her voice bright but calm. He helped me. The woman's gaze sharpened slightly. Helped you. My foot got stepped on at the church, she explained. I couldn't walk very well, so he carried me. A brief silence followed. The woman looked down at her daughter's foot, then back at William. Is that true? She asked gently. William nodded. She was having trouble walking. It seemed easier to carry her. The woman held his gaze for a moment longer, measuring something unspoken. Then her shoulders softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "You didn't have to do that." "No," William replied quietly. "I didn't." The girl stepped slightly closer to her mother. "I invited him for dinner," she added. Another pause. The woman's eyes flickered, surprise crossing her face, but only briefly. "You did," she said. She said, "You always make enough for one more." The girl continued almost carefully now. The woman looked at her daughter again, then at William for a moment. The air held still. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Well," she said with a small, warm smile. "I suppose we do." She gestured lightly toward the inside of the house. "You're welcome to join us." William didn't move right away. He stood there just outside the threshold. The faint sound of a kitchen clock ticking somewhere inside. The quiet hum of a home that existed without pretense. Dinner. It had been a long time since that word had meant anything beyond obligation or schedule. Now it felt different, personal, unstructured, real. He glanced down at the girl who was watching him with quiet expectation, not demanding, not urging, just waiting. Then he looked back at her mother. "Thank you," he said, and stepped inside. The warmth hit him first, not just from the air, but from the space itself. The house was small but carefully kept. A couch near the window, a folded blanket draped over the arm, a table set for two, with an extra chair tucked slightly to the side. The scent of something cooking simple familiar filled the room. "Go wash your hands," the mother said gently to her daughter. "And take off your shoes." The girl nodded and disappeared down the hallway. The woman turned back to William. "I'm sorry," she said. "She can be direct." William shook his head slightly. "She's polite." A faint smile touched the woman's face. "She tries to be." There was a brief pause. "I'm grateful you helped her," she added. "It's not always easy for people to stop these days." William glanced toward the doorway where the girl had disappeared. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." The words lingered between them. Then from down the hall, the girl's voice called out. "Mom, it hurts less now." The woman exhaled softly, relief evident. "That's good," she replied. William stood there for a moment longer, taking in the small details of the room, the kind of details he had stopped noticing in his own life. A photograph on the wall, a stack of books on a side table, a sense of presence. He hadn't expected this, any of it. And yet, as he stood in that modest home, the echoes of the church still lingering somewhere in his mind, he realized something quietly, almost reluctantly. This wasn't just a detour. It was a beginning of something he didn't yet understand, but wasn't ready to walk away from. The kitchen felt smaller once all three of them were inside, but not in a way that crowded the air. It felt held together, like every object had been placed with intention. Every inch of space quietly respected. William stood near the doorway at first, unsure where to place himself in a room that clearly belonged to someone else's life. He had spent years walking into offices, boardrooms, and private lounges where space adjusted around him automatically. Chairs were pulled out before he reached them. Conversations paused when he entered. People made room without being asked. Here, nothing moved unless someone chose to move it. "Please sit," the woman said, gesturing toward the small wooden table. "Dinner's almost ready." William nodded and stepped forward, pulling out the chair slowly as if testing whether he belonged in it. The wood creaked faintly under his weight, a sound so ordinary it felt unfamiliar. From down the hall, the girl returned, her steps still careful but steadier now. She had washed her hands, her sleeves pushed up slightly, her hair a little more out of place than before. "It feels better," she announced as if that mattered to everyone in the room. "It will," her mother replied gently. "You just need to rest it." The girl nodded, then glanced at William before taking her seat. "You can sit there," she said, pointing to the chair across from her. William almost smiled again. He sat. The woman moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, placing dishes on the table one by one. Nothing elaborate, just simple food prepared with care. A plate of baked chicken seasoned with something warm and familiar. Green beans sautéed slightly. A bowl of mashed potatoes still steaming. Bread set neatly on a small plate beside it. It wasn't the kind of meal that made headlines, but it was the kind that fed people. "We usually say grace," the woman said, pausing briefly as she set the last dish down. "If that's all right with you." William hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. Then he nodded. "That's fine." They bowed their heads. The woman's voice was calm, steady. "Thank you for this food, for this home, and for the kindness that found its way to our door today. Bless the hands that prepared this meal and the ones that carried what we couldn't." William felt something tighten slightly at that last line. "Amen," she finished. "Amen," the girl echoed softly. William lifted his head a moment later, slower than the others. For a while, they ate in quiet, not awkward silence. Just space, the kind that didn't need to be filled immediately. The girl reached for the bread, then paused. "Do you want some?" she asked, offering it toward William. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She passed it carefully. "Mom makes the best bread," she added, as if it were a fact that needed to be acknowledged. "I believe that," William replied. The woman smiled faintly, but didn't interrupt. A few more moments passed. Then the girl spoke again. "Do you always work on Sundays?" she asked. William glanced up. "Sometimes." Why? The question was simple, direct. He considered it because there's always something that needs to be done, he said. She frowned slightly, thinking that through. Even on Sundays? Yes. She looked down at her plate, then back up at him. My mom says Sundays are for slowing down. William glanced toward the woman. She didn't look away. It helps people remember what matters, she said calmly. The words were gentle, but they carried weight. William returned his attention to his plate, though he wasn't really seeing it. What matters? He had built a life around things that mattered, at least things that were supposed to. Growth, stability, influence, control. But sitting here in a small kitchen where nothing was polished and everything was real. Those definitions felt incomplete. You don't talk a lot, the girl observed. William looked up again, slightly caught off guard. No, he admitted, not usually. Were you always like that? He paused. No. What changed? The question hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. William felt the answer rise before he could stop it. Life, he said. It was the simplest version of the truth. The girl studied him for a moment, then nodded as if she understood more than she should. My mom says life changes people, she said. But it doesn't mean they forget how to be kind. The room grew still. The woman glanced at her daughter briefly, then back at William. I hope she's right, William said quietly. She usually is, the woman replied. They continued eating. The conversation didn't disappear. It just softened, moving in smaller directions. The girl talked about school, about a spelling test she had passed. About a friend who always traded snacks. Her voice carried an easy rhythm, filling the room without overwhelming it. William listened, really listened, not out of obligation, but because for reasons he couldn't fully explain, it mattered. At one point, the girl looked at him again. You carried me really carefully, she said. I tried to, he replied. My dad used to do that, she added. The words landed gently, but they stayed. William didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Instead, he nodded once, acknowledging something unspoken. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, her expression soft but composed. There was history there, quiet, present. Dinner continued, simpler, steady, real, and somewhere between one bite and the next. William realized something he hadn't noticed in years. He wasn't thinking about leaving. Not about the time. Not about the messages waiting on his phone. Not about the world outside this small kitchen. For the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he was, and that more than anything else unsettled him, because it meant one thing. Something had already begun to change. The plates had been cleared, but the warmth of the meal lingered in the room like something unwilling to leave too quickly. William sat back slightly in his chair, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He couldn't remember the last time he had stayed at a table after eating without checking his watch, without mentally stepping into the next obligation waiting for him outside the room. Here, time had softened. It hadn't stopped, but it had lost its urgency. At the sink, the girl's mother rinsed the dishes with quiet efficiency. The steady rhythm of water against porcelain filled the space, grounding it in something simple and familiar. I can help, William said, rising slightly. She shook her head gently without turning. You've done enough today. I carried her, he replied. That hardly counts as enough. This time she paused just for a moment. Then she turned slightly, a faint, knowing look in her eyes. Most people wouldn't have done that. William didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say to that. From the table, the girl watched him carefully. You don't think it's a big deal, she said. It was just the right thing to do, he answered. She tilted her head, studying him the way children sometimes do when they sense something adults try to hide. Then why didn't anyone else do it? The question landed quietly, but it stayed. William looked at her, then briefly toward the window, where the fading light of late afternoon had begun to shift into evening. I suppose, he said slowly. Sometimes people are too focused on where they're going to notice who's struggling beside them. She seemed to think about that. Then she nodded once, as if storing the answer somewhere. Her mother returned to the table, drying her hands with a small towel. She asks a lot of questions, she said. That's not a bad thing, William replied. No, she agreed. It isn't. There was a brief pause. Then the girl spoke again. Are you going to leave now? She asked. The question was direct, but not anxious, just curious. William glanced toward the door. His coat still rested where he had placed it earlier. His phone was inside, silent but waiting. His driver would still be outside, patient, trained, not to ask questions. Everything from his other life was still there, unchanged. Yes, he said after a moment. I should. The girl nodded, accepting that without argument. Okay, she said, but she didn't look away. And something about that, about the absence of protest, the quiet understanding made the word should feel heavier than it had a second ago. William stood. The chair slid back softly against the floor. The room seemed to shift slightly with the movement, as if marking the transition. Thank you, he said to her mother. For the meal. You're welcome, she replied. And thank you for bringing her home, he nodded once. Then he reached for his coat as he slipped it on. The familiar weight settled across his shoulders, a reminder of who he was outside this house. The fabric was sharp, structured, unyielding, very different from what he had just stepped out of. He turned toward the door, then paused. Behind him, the girl remained seated, her hands folded loosely on the table, watching him in that same quiet way she had since the church. Not asking, not holding on, just present. Does it still hurt? He asked, gesturing lightly toward her foot. A little, she said, but not like before. That's good. Another pause. Then she said, thank you for carrying me. The words were simple, but this time they felt different. Not just gratitude for the act, something more, something that reached beyond the moment itself. William held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. "You're welcome," he said again. He turned back to the door. His hand rested briefly on the handle, and for a moment, just a moment, he didn't open it. "I can leave," he thought. "Everything will go back to how it was." The idea was familiar, comfortable, predictable, but it no longer felt complete. Behind him, the quiet of the house remained unchanged. No one rushed him. No one tried to stop him. That more than anything, made the moment real. Choice, not expectation. William exhaled slowly. Then he opened the door. The evening air met him immediately, cooler now, carrying the distant hum of the city returning to its usual rhythm. His driver straightened as he approached, already stepping forward to open the car door. William stopped before reaching it. He turned back. The door behind him remained slightly open, warm light spilling onto the small porch. Inside, he could see the outline of the girl standing now, just behind her mother watching. He didn't step back, he didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. For a second, the distance between two worlds stretched out in front of him clear, defined. Then his driver spoke softly. "Sir." William blinked once, the moment breaking just enough. "Yes," he said. He turned, stepping toward the car at last. The door opened. He paused again just before getting in. Then, almost without thinking, he glanced back one more time. The door was still open. The light was still on and the feeling quiet, unfamiliar, impossible to ignore remained. He got into the car. The door closed. The city began to move again. But as the car pulled away from the curb, William Carter realized something that unsettled him more than any decision he had made in years. He had left, but part of him hadn't. The car ride back felt longer than it should have. William sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the passing lights outside, though he wasn't really seeing them. Chicago moved the way it always did, steady, restless, alive in a way that refused to slow down for anyone. Traffic flowed. People crossed streets with purpose. Neon signs flickered on as dusk deepened into evening. Everything continued exactly as it should, except something had shifted. "Office." His driver asked from the front. Voice respectful, measured. William didn't answer immediately. He had always had an answer. "Yes," he said finally. The car adjusted its direction slightly, merging into a heavier stream of traffic. The city grew sharper as they moved toward downtown, taller buildings, brighter lights, a different kind of energy, the kind that thrived on urgency. William leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a brief moment, and immediately the quiet kitchen returned. The sound of dishes, the warmth of the air, the steady, unhurried rhythm of a place that existed without deadlines, and her voice. "You can carry me just for a little while. I can walk the rest." He opened his eyes again. The city lights blurred slightly against the window. "You don't talk a lot. You carried me carefully. My mom says Sundays are for slowing down." The words came back in fragments. Uninvited, unwelcome, and yet impossible to ignore. "Sir." William looked up. "Yes, we're about 10 minutes out," the driver said. William nodded once. 10 minutes. That was all it would take to return to the version of his life that made sense. Structured, predictable, controlled. The car pulled up in front of a glass building that rose cleanly into the night sky. His building, steel and precision, every line intentional, every surface reflecting power in its most refined form. The driver stepped out, opening the door. William didn't move right away. For a brief second, he sat there, the city humming outside, the memory of something quieter still lingering inside him. Then he stepped out. The air was colder here, sharper. A doorman nodded as he passed. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." "Good evening." The lobby was exactly as it always was. Polished floors, muted lighting, a quiet efficiency that never faltered. People moved with purpose. Conversations were low, controlled. No one lingered without reason. William walked through it all without slowing. The elevator opened before he reached it. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected him back, perfectly composed, perfectly in place. The coat, the posture, the expression, untouched. The doors closed. Silence. For a moment, he stood there alone, the hum of the elevator rising around him as it ascended. Then, without warning, his reflection shifted, not physically, but in the way he saw it. He wasn't looking at himself. He was remembering a smaller hand gripping his sleeve. "Daddy, can you carry me?" His jaw tightened. He turned slightly, breaking the line of sight with the mirror. The elevator continued upward. When the doors opened again, the world resumed. His floor assistants already waiting. A quiet nod from his executive secretary. "You have 3 messages marked urgent," she said, walking beside him. "And a call from London scheduled in 20 minutes. William nodded. "Reschedule the call," he said. She blinked slightly, just enough to register surprise, but only for a second. "Yes, sir. What time would you prefer?" "Tomorrow." "Understood." They reached his office. The doors opened. The space inside was expansive, controlled, immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The skyline stretching endlessly into the night. Everything in the room had its place. Everything served a function. It was the kind of office people admired, the kind that represented success. William stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Silence returned, but not the same kind he had left behind. This silence was different, empty. He moved toward his desk, setting his phone down without checking it. The screen lit briefly, missed calls, messages, notifications, but he ignored them. Instead, He walked to the window. The city spread out below him, vast and unrelenting. For years, this view had grounded him. It reminded him of what he had built, what he controlled, what he had earned. Tonight, it felt distant, disconnected. You're good at carrying people. The memory came back, soft but persistent. William exhaled slowly. No, he thought. I'm good at managing outcomes, controlling variables, keeping things from falling apart, carrying people. That was something else entirely. He loosened his tie slightly, something he rarely did before the end of the day. The motion felt unfamiliar. Then he sat down. The chair adjusted automatically beneath him, perfect as always. His hands rested on the desk still. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, didn't open a file, didn't call anyone. He simply sat there and thought, not about business, not about numbers, but about a small house at the end of a quiet street, about a table set for two that had made room for three without hesitation, about a child who had asked for just enough help to keep going and had trusted him to give it, and about the way that trust had felt. He leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting again to the city beyond the glass. I suppose I still am, he had said earlier, busy though necessary. But for the first time in a long time, those words felt incomplete because somewhere between the church and that house, he had stepped outside of that definition and nothing had fallen apart. If anything, something had come back. William reached for his phone at last. The screen lit up immediately. Messages, calls, expectations waiting to be answered. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly he set it back down. Not ignored, not rejected, just postponed. The city continued to move below him, unchanged. But inside that office, high above everything he had built, William Carter sat in a silence that no longer felt empty. It felt unsettled, as if something had been set in motion. And whatever it wasn't finished with him yet. William did not sleep well that night. It wasn't unusual. Sleep had become something he managed rather than something he experienced. But this time, the restlessness felt different. It wasn't driven by pressure or unresolved decisions. There were no looming deals, no crises waiting to be handled by morning. Instead, his mind kept returning to something far simpler, a small kitchen, a quiet voice, a child who had asked for help as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He turned slightly in bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse. The city lights filtered through the glass walls, casting faint reflections that shifted with passing traffic below. It was a view most people would have envied. Tonight, it felt distant. You can carry me just for a little while. I can walk the rest. The words came back again, softer now, but no less persistent. William closed his eyes. For a moment, another memory surfaced, one he had spent years avoiding. A smaller room, a softer voice. Daddy, don't put me down yet. His chest tightened. He opened his eyes again, the present rushing back in before the past could take hold too deeply. Morning came earlier than he expected. Not because he slept well, but because he stopped trying. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, William was already awake, standing near the window with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, sharp and precise in the early light. The world was already moving. Cars threading through streets, people beginning their routines, the quiet build of another day that would demand attention. His phone buzzed softly on the table behind him. He didn't turn. Another vibration, then another. Eventually, he walked back and picked it up. Messages, emails, reminders. Normad, expected, necessary. He scrolled briefly, then stopped. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before he locked it again. And set it down. There was something else on his mind. Something that didn't belong on a schedule. He dressed without thinking. Movements automatic, precise. Suit, tie, shoes polished to perfection. By the time he stepped into the elevator, he looked exactly as he always did, composed, controlled, untouched. But inside something had shifted. The lobby greeted him with its usual efficiency. A quiet nod from the doorman. A greeting from the front desk. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Good morning. His car was waiting. The driver stepped forward, opening the door. Good morning, sir. William paused for a moment before getting in. Not the office, he said. The driver blinked once, just enough to register the change. Where to, sir? William hesitated. The answer came slower than expected. Southside, he said finally. I'll give you the street. The driver nodded. Of course. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the steady flow of morning traffic. For a while, neither of them spoke. The city changed gradually as they moved. Glass towers giving way to older buildings, wide streets narrowing, the rhythm shifting from corporate urgency to something more grounded, more human. William watched it all through the window. He had been here before technically. Investments, site visits, controlled appearances, but this felt different. He wasn't coming as a figure. He was coming as something else. The car slowed as they turned onto a familiar street. Here, the driver asked. Yes. The car came to a stop a short distance from the house. William didn't get out immediately. He sat there for a moment, looking at the small row of homes, the quiet morning settling over them. A woman across the street watered a plant on her porch. A man walked past with a newspaper tucked under his arm. Life moved here, but not in a rush. He stepped out. The air was cooler than the day before, but clear. Wait here, he told the driver. Yes, sir. William walked toward the house. Each step felt deliberate, not uncertain, just aware. He reached the door and paused. For a second, he simply stood there. Then he knocked. The sound echoed lightly through the quiet morning. Footsteps followed quickly from inside. The door opened. The girl stood there. For a moment, she just looked at him, not surprised, not confused. Just certain. You came back, she said. William met her gaze. Yes, he replied behind her. Her mother appeared, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. Mr. Carter, she said. He nodded slightly. Good morning. There was a brief pause. Then the girl stepped aside as if it had already been decided. You can come in, she said. William hesitated only for a moment. Then he stepped inside again. The house felt the same. We lived in real, but something about it felt different now. Not because it had changed, because he had. I wasn't sure if you would, the girl said as she moved toward the table. William took a slow breath. Neither was I, he admitted. The words surprised even him. Her mother studied him quietly for a moment, then nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Well, she said gently, you're here now. William glanced around the room again. The same table, the same quiet details, the same sense of something grounded and whole. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was visiting. He felt like he had returned. Something had started the moment he chose to carry her. Now standing there again, he understood something else. He hadn't come back because he had to. He had come back because he wanted to. And that was something entirely new. The morning light filled the small house in a way that felt different from the night before. It wasn't warmer exactly, but it revealed things more clearly. The edges of the table, the faint wear on the floor, the quiet order of a life built carefully over time. Nothing hidden, nothing polished for display. William stood just inside the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, as if adjusting to the shift from one world to another. You're early, the girl said, watching him with the same steady calm. I suppose I am, he replied. Her mother moved toward the kitchen, already reaching for a kettle. Coffee, she asked. Yes, thank you. William stepped further inside, the door closing softly behind him. This time, the space didn't feel unfamiliar. The layout was already known to him. The table, the chairs, the small details that had stayed with him longer than they should have. The girl walked carefully across the room, her steps more stable now, though still measured. It hurts less today, she said, almost as an update. That's good, William replied, watching her for a moment. You should still take it easy, she nodded, then climbed onto her chair at the table. Her mother set a mug in front of William and poured the coffee without asking how he liked it. Somehow it was exactly right. You didn't have to come back, she said, her tone calm but observant. William wrapped his hand around the mug, feeling the warmth settle into his palm. I know, he said. A small pause followed. Then why did you? She asked. The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't demanding, just honest. William looked down briefly at the coffee, watching the faint ripple on its surface. I wasn't finished, he said. The answer surprised even him. Her mother studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if that was enough for now. The girl leaned forward a little, resting her elbows on the table. You came back to see if I could walk, didn't you? William glanced at her. Yes, he said. She smiled faintly. I told you I could. You did. She swung her feet slightly under the chair, careful not to put too much pressure on the injured one. I can walk better today, she added. But not fast yet. William nodded. Then we won't walk fast, he said. The words came out naturally. Too naturally. The girl seemed to notice. You don't have to stay, she said. You already helped me. William leaned back slightly in his chair. I know, he replied. Another pause, but this one felt different. Less uncertain, more intentional. What do you usually do in the mornings? He asked. The girl thought about it. School, she said. But not today. My mom said I should rest my foot. William looked toward her mother. She needs a day, she said simply. He nodded. That makes sense. The girl tilted her head slightly. What do you usually do in the mornings? William almost answered automatically. Meetings, calls, decisions. But none of those words felt like they belonged here. I work, he said instead. She studied him for a second. You worked yesterday, too. Yes. And the day before. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. Do you ever not work? The question landed gently, but it stayed. William didn't answer right away. I suppose not very often, he admitted. She nodded slowly as if confirming something she had already suspected. My mom says people need to rest or they forget how to be themselves. William glanced toward her mother again. She didn't look up from what she was doing, but there was the faintest hint of a smile. He looked back at the girl. And who do you think I am? He asked. She didn't hesitate. You're the man who carried me, she said. The answer was immediate, certain, clear as throat and somehow complete. William felt something shift again deeper this time. Not in the world around him, in the way he was being seen, not as a title, not as a position, but as an action, a choice. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at her. That's one way to describe it, he said quietly. It's the right way, she replied. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It settled comfortably between them, like something that didn't need to be filled. Outside, a car passed slowly. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. Life continued, steady and unremarkable. Inside, time felt different again. Not slower, just less urgent. Her mother set a plate of toast on the table. You should eat something, she said to William. I'm fine, he replied. You said that yesterday, too, the girl added. He looked at her. Then, after a brief pause, he reached for a piece of toast. Thank you, he said. She smiled slightly, as if that small decision mattered. And maybe it did. They sat there together, not as strangers anymore, but not quite something else either. Something in between, something forming. William took a bite, then set the toast down. He looked around the room again. The same details, the same quiet order. But this time, he noticed something new. Not what was there, what wasn't. Noise, pressure, expectation. For the first time in years, he wasn't being pulled in 10 different directions at once. He was just present. You're not in a hurry today, the girl observed. William exhaled slowly. No, he said, I'm not. And as the words settled into the room, he realized something he hadn't fully understood until that moment. The world he had built would keep moving without him. The calls would wait. The decisions would still be there. But this small, quiet morning in a place that asked nothing from him except honesty. This would not always be here, and for once he chose not to leave it too quickly. The morning stretched gently into late afternoon without anyone noticing exactly when it happened. Time in that small house didn't announce itself the way it did in William's world. There were no alerts, no reminders, no quiet pressure ticking beneath every passing minute. It simply moved softly, steadily, carrying the day forward without asking permission. William had not checked his phone once. It rested on the table beside him now, silent, untouched, as if it belonged to another version of his life that had briefly lost its way. You're still here, the girl said, not as a question, but as an observation. William looked up from where he had been watching the light shift across the floor. Yes, he said. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. I thought you might leave after breakfast, she added. I thought so too, he admitted. Her mother glanced at him from across the room where she was folding laundry with slow, practiced movements. But you didn't, she said. No, William replied. There was no explanation after that. None was needed. The girl slid off her chair and walked carefully toward the window, testing her steps again. There was still a slight hesitation in her movement, but it was improving, less guarded, more natural. It doesn't hurt as much now, she said. William stood instinctively, moving a step closer without fully realizing it. Still be careful, he said. I am, she replied. She turned, looking at him with quiet thoughtfulness. Do you have to go to work today? She asked. The question lingered longer than it should have. William considered it. The answer technically was yes. There were always things waiting, always people expecting him, always decisions that carried weight beyond a single moment. But standing here in a place where none of those expectations existed, the word have felt negotiable. Not right now, he said. She accepted that without question. Good, she replied simply. Her mother paused her folding, watching the exchange for a moment. You're not used to this, are you? She asked. William looked at her. To what? She gestured lightly around the room, staying still. The words were gentle but precise. William gave a faint, almost thoughtful nod. No, he said. I'm not. She smiled slightly, not unkindly. It takes practice. William considered that. I'm beginning to notice. The girl moved back toward the table, pulling out her chair and sitting again. Do you want to see something? She asked. William raised an eyebrow slightly. What is it? She reached for a small notebook resting near the edge of the table and opened it carefully. I draw sometimes, she said. She turned it toward him. Inside were simple drawings, houses, people, small moments captured with uneven but sincere lines. Crayons had been used in layers. Some colors pressing harder than others. As if emotion had guided the pressure of each stroke, William leaned slightly closer. These are good, he said. She smiled, but not proudly, just quietly pleased. I drew yesterday, too, she added. He turned another page. There it was. 3 figures, one small, one slightly taller, and one carrying the other. The lines were simple, but the meaning was unmistakable. William's gaze lingered on the drawing longer than he intended. That's you, she said, pointing. I figured. And that's me, he nodded. And that's my mom, she added, tapping the third figure standing beside them. William didn't speak for a moment. There was something about seeing the moment reflected back, reduced to its simplest form, stripped of context, stripped of complexity, that made it feel permanent, real in a way memory alone could not hold. You made me look taller, he said finally. She tilted her head. You are tall, he almost smiled again. Her mother stepped closer, glancing down at the page. That's beautiful, she said. The girl nodded, then looked back at William. I wanted to remember it, she said. The words settled quietly between them. William felt something shift again. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady, like something being placed carefully into a space that had been empty for too long. You will, he said. She shook her head slightly. Drawings help more, he nodded. I think you're right. She closed the notebook gently, as if sealing something important inside. Outside, the afternoon had begun to fade. The light softened, stretching longer shadows across the street. Time was moving again. William noticed it this time. Not because it demanded attention, but because something inside him recognized it. I should probably go soon, he said. The words came quietly, not as a decision, as an acknowledgement. The girl didn't react immediately. She simply looked at him, then nodded once. Okay. No hesitation, no resistance, just understanding. Her mother met his gaze as well. You're always welcome back, she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not obligation, not expectation, just openness. William took that in. I appreciate that, he replied. He reached for his coat, lifting it slowly, as if the motion itself marked a transition he wasn't entirely ready for. As he slipped it on, the familiar structure settled back into place around him, but it didn't feel the same. It felt less complete than it had before. He turned toward the door, then paused. The girl was watching him again, not asking him to stay, not asking anything at all. Just present. William stepped closer. Take it easy on that foot, he said. I will. A brief silence followed. Then she added, you can come back. Not a guest Jun, not even on invitation, just a statement as if it were already understood. William held her gaze for a moment. Yes, he said quietly. I can. He turned and walked toward the door. This time when he opened it, the outside world didn't feel as distant, but it didn't feel as familiar either. He stepped out onto the porch. The air had cooled again, carrying the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. His car was still there, waiting, just as it always would be. But as William Carter walked toward it, he realized something that hadn't been true in a very long time. He wasn't just leaving, he was planning to return. The city seemed louder when William returned to it, not because anything had changed, but because he had. The car door closed with a soft, precise sound, sealing him back into the controlled silence he had known for years. The driver pulled away from the curb without needing instruction, merging smoothly into the rhythm of evening traffic. Buildings rose again around them, taller, sharper, more defined, until the quiet neighborhood disappeared behind glass in motion. William sat back, his gaze fixed forward, but his mind remained elsewhere. You can come back. The girl's voice lingered, steady and certain. Not hopeful, not doubtful. He exhaled slowly, his hand resting against the edge of the seat. Return. The word carried weight now. Not obligation, not strategy, choice. His phone vibrated once, then again, then continuously, as if it had been waiting all day for his attention, and had finally decided it would no longer be ignored. William glanced down at it. Missed calls, messages stacked one after another, emails marked urgent. The world he had stepped away from had not paused. It had simply continued without him, and now it was catching up. He picked up the phone. For a moment, he just looked at the screen. Then he unlocked it. The first message was from his executive assistant. Board requested immediate update, awaiting your response. The second, media inquiry regarding your absence this morning. The third, urgent investment partner requesting confirmation. William scrolled briefly, his expression unreadable. Then he locked the phone again. Not dismissed, not resolved, just deferred. Office, the driver asked. William hesitated. The answer should have been immediate. It always was. Yes. The car adjusted direction. Downtown rose around them again, the skyline reflecting the last light of day as it faded into night. The building came into view. Glass and steel, standing exactly as it always had, untouched by anything outside its walls. William stepped out. The transition was immediate. Good evening, Mr. Carter. Good evening. The lobby moved around him with practiced efficiency. People straightened as he passed. Conversations shifted subtly. His presence reasserted itself without effort. He entered the elevator. The doors closed. And once again, he was alone. His reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls, perfectly composed, perfectly controlled. But now there was something else there, something quieter, something that hadn't been there before. The elevator rose. When the doors opened, his assistant was already waiting. You have been difficult to reach, she said carefully, falling into step beside him. I was unavailable, he replied. Yes, sir. A brief pause. The board is expecting you. William nodded once. Schedule it. They're ready now. He didn't break stride. Then let's not keep them waiting. The conference room was already filled when he entered. Executives, advisors, familiar faces arranged around a long table, each one carrying the weight of expectation. The conversation stopped the moment he stepped in. Mr. Carter, one of them said, standing slightly. William took his seat at the head of the table. Let's begin. The meeting unfolded as it always did. Numbers, reports, concerns, projections, voices layered over one another, controlled but urgent, each point carefully structured, each argument supported by data. William listened. He responded when necessary. He asked questions. He made decisions. On the surface, nothing had changed. He was exactly who he had always been in this room. But beneath that, something was different. A hesitation, not an action, in perspective. We need your approval to move forward, one of the executives said, sliding a document across the table. William glanced at it. The numbers made sense. They always did. But as he looked at the page, something unexpected surfaced. A small kitchen, a quiet table, a child saying, "My mom says you should always leave room for kindness." The memory interrupted the flow of the room in a way nothing else ever had. Mr. Carter. William looked up. The room was waiting. He held their gaze for a moment. Then he made his decision. Not yet, he said. Aposa. The room shifted slightly. Sir, another voice asked. Well, revisit this, William continued. There are variables we haven't considered. There were no objections. There rarely were, but the atmosphere changed. Subtle, but real. The meeting continued, but William's focus had shifted. Not away from the work, but deeper into something else. Something that had nothing to do with numbers. When the meeting finally ended, the room emptied quickly. People gathered their papers, their devices, their carefully managed expressions. William remained seated. For a moment, he didn't move. The room, once full of voices, settled into silence. He looked down at the document in front of him. Then, slowly, he pushed it aside. Not rejected, just not enough. He stood, walked back to his office, closed the door. The city stretched out before him again, illuminated now by thousands of lights. He had returned to everything he had built, to everything that had defined him. And yet it no longer felt like the whole picture. "You're the man who carried me." The words came back clear and steady. William leaned his hand lightly against the glass. For years he had been defined by what he controlled. Now he was being defined by something else, something smaller, simpler, more difficult to measure. He picked up his phone again. This time he didn't hesitate. He scrolled, paused, then opened a new message. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then he typed, "I'll be unavailable this Sunday." He read it once, then sent it. A small decision, but it settled something. He set the phone down, looked out at the city again, and for the first time since stepping back into this world, William Carter allowed himself to admit something quietly, honestly, without resistance. He was no longer just returning to his life. He was beginning to change it. The decision he made that night did not feel large. There was no announcement, no visible shift in the way the world responded to him. The city did not slow. The markets did not pause, and no one in his orbit questioned the quiet message he had sent. "I'll be unavailable this Sunday." It was a small sentence, but it stayed with him. The next few days unfolded the way they always did, structured, efficient, relentless. Meetings stacked against each other with no wasted space in between. Calls that stretched across time zones, decisions that required precision, speed, and absolute clarity. And William delivered. He always did. From the outside, nothing had changed. He moved through his office with the same control, the same authority. His voice remained steady in meetings. His decisions remained sharp. People still watched him the same way, with expectation, with reliance, with the quiet understanding that he would not hesitate when it mattered. But beneath that, something had shifted. It appeared in small moments, in pauses that hadn't existed before. In questions he found himself asking not about outcomes, but about impact. On Wednesday afternoon, it surfaced clearly. He sat in a meeting with senior advisors, reviewing a proposal tied to one of his company's expansion projects. The numbers were strong. The strategy was sound. The recommendation was clear. Approve and move forward. "This will increase efficiency across the entire region," one of the advisors said, pointing to a projection on the screen. "Minimal risk, maximum return." William listened. He understood the logic immediately. He always did. "And the local impact?" he asked. The room stilled slightly. The advisor hesitated. "There will be some displacement initially, but how many?" William interrupted. Another pause. "Approximately 200 families," the advisor replied. William leaned back slightly in his chair. 200. The number was small in the context of the company. Negligible even, but for some reason, it didn't feel that way. He saw something else. A narrow street, a modest house, a table set for two that had made room for three. Without hesitation, he heard a voice. "My mom says you should always leave room for kindness." The memory settled into the room without being spoken. William looked at the screen again, then back at the advisor. "We'll revise the plan," he said. The response was immediate. "Sir, the current structure is optimized." "It's incomplete," William said calmly. The tone left no room for argument. "Well, find a solution that doesn't require that level of displacement." The room shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. "Yes, sir," the advisor said. The meeting continued, but something had changed, not just in the decision, in the way it had been made. Later that evening, William sat alone in his office again. The city stretched out below him, familiar and unchanged. Lights flickered across the skyline. Cars moved in endless streams. The rhythm of everything he had built continued without interruption. But his focus wasn't on the city. It was on the quiet space between one thought and the next. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting against the arms of his chair. 200 families, a number, a calcul, a decision. And yet, it no longer felt abstract. It felt personal. "You're the man who carried me." The words came back again. Not demanding, not accusing, just present. William exhaled slowly. For years, he had separated his worlds. Business was business. Life was something else. But now the line between them felt less defined. On Friday morning, his assistant entered his office with a stack of documents. "These require your signature," she said, placing them neatly on his desk. William glanced at them briefly, then paused. "Reschedule my afternoon," he said. She blinked slightly. "You have a meeting with I'm aware," he replied. "Move it." A short pause. "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "If I may ask, is everything all right?" William looked up at her. It wasn't a question he was used to hearing. At least not in that tone. "Yes," he said, and for once, it wasn't just a reflex. It was true. The afternoon passed without the usual structure. No meeting, no call, no urgency, just space. And in that space, his thoughts returned again to the same place they had been all week. Sunday. He didn't question it. He didn't analyze it. He simply let it exist. When Sunday morning arrived, it felt different before he even stepped outside. Not quieter, but clearer. He dressed the same way he always did. Suit, tie, precision. But the intention behind it had changed. This wasn't routine. This was a choice. The car waited. The driver opened the door. "Where to, sir?" William didn't hesitate. "The church," he said. The drive felt shorter this time. Or maybe it just felt more certain. When they arrived, the building stood exactly as it had before. Aged brick, worn steps, quiet strength. People moved in and out, the rhythm of the place unchanged. William stepped out. This time, he didn't pause. He walked inside. The air carried the same familiar warmth, the same layered sound of voices and movement. The service had already begun, the low hum of a sermon filling the space. He didn't sit in the back. He moved further in, not to the front, but not hidden either. Somewhere in between. For the first time, he wasn't observing. He was present, and as he sat there, listening, not just hearing, but listening, he realized something that had been building quietly all week. He hadn't come back to see what would happen. He had come back because something already had. And whatever it wasn't finished with him yet. The sermon had already begun when William entered, but he didn't feel late. For once, time didn't press against him like an obligation waiting to be met. The words from the pulpit carried across the room in a steady, grounded rhythm, not loud, not dramatic, but firm enough to settle into the space between thoughts. Kindness is not measured by convenience, the pastor was saying. It is measured by what it costs you to give it. William stood still for a moment longer than necessary, letting the sentence land. What it costs you. He moved quietly down the aisle, choosing a seat not too far from the center this time, not hidden in the back, not standing apart, just present around him. People listened in their own ways. Some leaned forward slightly, others sat back with their hands folded. A woman near the front nodded slowly at certain points, as if she had heard these truths before, but still needed to be reminded of them. William sat still, not analyzing, not dissecting, just listening. Because the world will always give you a reason not to stop, the pastor continued. It will tell you you're too busy, too important, too late, too tired, and most of the time those reasons will sound reasonable. A faint shift moved through the room. William's gaze lowered slightly. Too busy, too important. The words echoed somewhere deeper than he expected. He had lived inside those reasons for years. He had built his life on them. But kindness doesn't wait for convenience. The voice went on. It asks you to choose it anyway. Choose. The word stayed with him. Not obligation, not expectation. Choice. William exhaled slowly, his hands resting loosely in his lap. For the first time, he wasn't comparing this moment to anything else. He wasn't measuring it against what he could be doing or what he might be missing. He was simply here. The service continued. Voices rose in song briefly, soft and collective, then settled again. A prayer followed, steady and unhurried. The rhythm of the place remained consistent, grounded in something that didn't need to prove itself. When it ended, people began to move again slowly at first, then with more purpose. Conversation started up in low tones, greetings exchanged, hands shaken. William stood for a moment. He didn't move toward the exit. He let the space breathe around him. Then he turned and saw her. She stood near the side aisle, her hand lightly resting against her mother's arm, her posture steady but relaxed now. Her foot seemed stronger today, less guarded, more natural. But it wasn't that held his attention. It was her expression. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even questioning. She was simply acknowledging. "You came back," she said, as if confirming something she had already known. William stepped closer. "Yes," he replied. Her mother looked at him, a quiet recognition in her eyes. Not curiosity, not surprise. Understanding. "We thought you might," she said. William nodded slightly. "I said I would." The girl shifted her weight lightly, testing her foot again. "It doesn't hurt anymore," she said. "That's good," he replied. She looked at him for a moment longer, then smiled faintly. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I know, but you did." Yes. The exchange was simple, but it held something more. Something that didn't need explanation. Her mother stepped slightly closer, her tone calm. "We're heading home," she said. "You're welcome to walk with us." William didn't hesitate. "I'd like that." They stepped out together. The air outside was cooler, carrying the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling into its Sunday rhythm. People moved along the sidewalk, some lingering, some heading home, the pace unhurried. This time, no one needed to be carried. The girl walked beside him, her steps steady now, though still careful. "You walk slower today," she observed. William glanced at her. "I noticed that too," she nodded as if approving of the change. "It's better this way," she said. He didn't argue. They reached the corner, turning onto the same street as before. The familiarity settled in quietly. Not repetition, recognition. When they arrived at the house, the moment didn't feel new. It felt continued. "You can come in," she said again as naturally as before. William paused only briefly, then nodded. All right. Inside, the house carried the same warmth, the same quiet order. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything felt different. Not because of the space. Because of him. He removed his coat this time without hesitation, placing it over the back of the chair as if it belonged there. Her mother moved toward the kitchen. "Lunch is simple today," she said. "Nothing special." William sat. "That's fine." The girl took her seat across from him again. "You came back twice," she said. "Yes." She studied him carefully. "Most people don't do that." William considered that. No, he said, they don't. Why do you? The question was direct, but this time it didn't feel difficult. William looked at her, then after a moment, he answered. Because the first time wasn't enough. The words settled into the room. Not heavy, just true. The girl nodded slowly as if she understood. Her mother glanced at him briefly, something unspoken passing through her expression. Outside, the world continued. Inside, something else was taking shape. Not sudden, not dramatic, but steady. And as William Carter sat at that table again in a place that asked nothing from him except presence, he realized something with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. This was no longer just a moment. It was becoming part of him. Lunch passed with the same quiet ease as the meal before it, but something beneath the surface had begun to deepen. It was no longer just politeness, no longer just gratitude. There was a rhythm forming now unspoken, but steady like something that had found its place without asking permission. William noticed it in the way he reached for a glass without hesitation. In the way the girl spoke to him as if he had always been part of the room. In the way her mother no longer watched him with careful distance, but with a quiet kind of acceptance. You don't look like you're visiting anymore, the girl said suddenly. William glanced up from his plate. What do I look like? She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Like you know where things are, she said, like you're not trying to leave. The words were simple, but they landed with precision. William leaned back slightly in his chair. I suppose I'm learning, he said. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Her mother moved around the kitchen, placing dishes in the sink, her movements unhurried. People don't usually learn that quickly, she said. William looked at her. Maybe I've had more practice than I thought, he replied. She gave a small, thoughtful nod. Or maybe, she said, you've been ready for it longer than you realized. The room settled into a brief silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just full outside. The afternoon had begun to soften. The light shifted through the window, stretching across the table in quiet patterns that moved slowly with time. The girl slid off her chair and walked toward the living room, her steps steady now. Come see this, she called. William stood without thinking. He followed her. On the wall near the couch hung a small collection of drawings, each one pinned carefully in place. Some were older, the edges slightly worn. Others were newer, colors brighter, lines more confident. She pointed to one in the center. This one's new, she said. William stepped closer. It was another drawing of 3 figures, but this time they weren't standing still. They were walking side by side. No one carrying anyone, no one falling behind, just moving together. William felt something shift again. Subtle, but deeper than before. You didn't draw me carrying you, he said. She shook her head. I don't need that anymore, she replied. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. He looked at the drawing again, then back at her. You're walking on your own now, she nodded. But you still came back, she added. The statement hung there, not as a question, not as a challenge, just recognition. William exhaled slowly. Yes, he said, I did. Her mother stepped into the room behind them, her gaze moving from the drawing to William. She's been talking about that since yesterday, she said. William glanced at her. She sees things clearly, he replied. She always has, her mother said. There was something in her tone now, something quieter, more personal. You don't have to keep coming back, she added. The words were gentle, but they carried truth, not pushing him away, not holding him there, just acknowledging the reality of choice. William looked at her. I know, he said. A pause followed. Then he added, but I want to. The room stilled slightly, not dramatically, but enough to mark the moment. Her mother held his gaze for a second longer than before. Then she nodded. Then that's different, she said. The difference settled into the space between them. Not obligation, not coincidence, choice. The girl walked back toward the table, picking up her notebook again. She flipped through the pages, then stopped on a blank one. I'm going to draw today, too, she said. What are you going to draw? William asked. She thought about it, then smiled slightly. Something new. William watched her for a moment, then looked around the room again. The same small details, the same quiet order, but now it didn't feel like something he had stepped into by accident. It felt like something he had stepped into on purpose. Outside, the light continued to fade. Time was moving again, and this time he noticed it without resistance. I should go, he said finally. The words came more easily now, not because he wanted to leave, but because leaving no longer meant ending. The girl nodded. Okay. No hesitation, no disappointment, just understanding. Her mother walked with him toward the door. Thank you, she said. For what? He asked. She opened the door slightly, letting the evening air in. For not walking past her, she replied. William paused, then nodded once. I almost did, he admitted. But you didn't. No. They stood there for a moment, the quiet of the evening settling around them. Then she added softly. That matters. William stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the street quieter than before. His car was waiting just as it always would be. But this time, the distance between where he stood and where he was going felt different. Behind him, the door remained open, light spilling out, not holding him, not calling him back. Just there, he turned slightly. The girl stood in the doorway, her notebook still in her hands. You can come back again, she said. William met her gaze. Yes, he replied. I will. He walked toward the car step by step, not leaving something behind, but carrying something with him. And as he reached the door, he understood something with quiet certainty. This wasn't a moment he would return to. It was a part of his life now. And this time, he wasn't going to walk past it. The drive back that evening felt different again. Not heavier, not lighter, just settled. William sat in the back seat, watching the neighborhood fade slowly behind him as the car moved forward. The small house, the quiet street, the open doorway, all of it remained visible for a few seconds longer than before, as if his mind refused to let it disappear too quickly. Then it was gone, replaced by motion, by distance, by the familiar rise of the city returning around him. But this time, the shift didn't pull him away from what he had just left. It carried it with him. His reflection appeared faintly in the window beside him. Layered over the passing streets, the same suit, the same composed posture, the same man the world expected to see, and yet not the same. "You're the man who carried me." The words returned again, but now they didn't feel like something new. They felt like something understood. The car slowed as they approached downtown. The buildings rising higher, the lights growing sharper, the rhythm tightening once more into something precise and controlled. His phone vibrated. William glanced at it, then picked it up without hesitation. This time, massage requests updates waiting for his attention. He opened the first, then the second, then paused. For a moment, he simply held the phone in his hand. Then instead of answering, he scrolled to a different contact. His thumb hovered for a second, then he pressed call. The line rang once, twice, then connected. "Mr. Carter," a voice answered immediately. "Yes," William said. There was a brief pause on the other end, as if the caller had expected something urgent. "I'd like you to begin a review," William continued. "Community impact all current and pending projects." Another pause. "Sir, could you clarify? I want to know exactly how our decisions affect the people outside our balance sheets," he said. "Not estimates, not projections, real outcomes." The silence on the line stretched just slightly longer. Then carefully, "Of course, sir." "Well, begin immediately." William nodded once, though the other person couldn't see it. "And I want solutions," he added. "Not just reports." "Yes, sir." He ended the call. The car continued forward. The city opened up again around him, vast and unchanged, but something had shifted within it. Not in structure, in direction. The car pulled to a stop in front of his building. The driver stepped out, opening the door. William paused briefly before stepping out, his gaze lifting toward the glass tower above him. For years, this had been the center of everything, the place where decisions were made, where control was maintained, where outcomes were shaped. Now it was still all of those things, but it was no longer the only place that mattered. He stepped inside. The lobby greeted him the same way it always did. Quiet, polished, efficient. People moved with purpose. Conversations lowered as he passed. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," the receptionist said. "Good evening." He entered the elevator. The doors closed. The mirrored walls reflected him back again, but this time he didn't look away. He held his own gaze, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging. When the doors opened, he stepped into his office without hesitation. The space was exactly as he had left it, immaculate, controlled, untouched by anything outside its walls. He walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, endless and alive. For a long moment, he stood there in silence. Then he spoke, not to anyone, not even out loud enough to be heard, just enough to feel the truth of it. "This isn't enough anymore." The words didn't carry frustration. They carried clarity. He turned back toward his desk, picked up his phone again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He opened his calendar, scrolled, then began to move things. Meetings shifted, calls rescheduled, time created, not removed, reclaimed. He paused when he reached the end of the week, then added something new. Sunday. No details, no explanation, just a space reserved. He set the phone down, looked out at the city once more, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing at the center of it. He felt like he was part of something larger, something that didn't need control to exist, something that had started with a simple question. "Can you carry me for a while?" William exhaled slowly, and in that quiet moment, high above the city he had spent years building, he understood something fully. He hadn't just helped a child that day. He had allowed himself to feel again, to choose again, to see again, and that was something he wasn't going to lose. Because this time, he knew exactly what it meant to carry something that mattered. This story reminds us that kindness is not about convenience, status, or time. It is about choice. In a world where everyone is rushing forward, it is easy to overlook those who fall behind. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Yet sometimes the smallest act, pausing, listening, carrying someone for just a little while, can change not only another person's life, but our own. True fulfillment does not come from power or success alone, but from connection, compassion, and the courage to care when it is inconvenient. Because in the end, what defines us is not how far we go, but who we choose to lift along the way. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.